This story took place when I was 9 or 10 years old, so just over 20 years ago. For context, my bedroom was on the second floor with a large window above my bed, looking down over my neighbor's backyard. It was 3 or 4 in the morning at the time that this took place. I woke up in my bed to a weird anxious feeling in my stomach. While lying under the covers, I could hear what I thought was a very windy storm coming outside my home. After a few seconds of laying there and listening, I saw these round bright lights reflecting off the walls of my bedroom. These lights were moving in a pattern that made it seem like they were attached to something that was spinning or rotating. These lights obviously seemed to be coming from outside, and so my curiosity got the better of me. I gathered some courage, and I eventually stood up on my bed to peek outside to see exactly where these lights were coming from. What I saw next was something that I'll never forget. In my neighbor's backyard, what I saw was a flying saucer. Just saying that makes me feel crazy, but it is literally the best way I can describe what I saw to you. It wasn't huge like you would picture in a movie. It was probably only 20 feet in diameter. It seemed like the entire craft was made of the same dark steel, with the exception of lights on and around most of the outer parts of the saucer, which, by the way, were super bright. Kind of like LED lights, which were not common at all during the time. So no windows from what I could see. This UFO, or whatever you want to call it, seemed to be hovering perfectly in one spot, about 5 to 10 feet above the ground and spinning very slowly. Everything around it was blowing around in the same direction the UFO was spinning. So I got the impression that the wind was being created by this UFO in its effort to hover in place. The hovering UFO had rounded top of what looked to be the same steel as the rest of the craft. I felt at the time like this is where this would have been if this thing had a window. The UFO wasn't completely smooth on the outside though. I could see what looked to be bolted steel on the outside, in a pattern, kind of like a wagon wheel. It only took a few moments to become truly terrified, but just as quickly as those feelings came, I felt this strange calming sensation come over me. I was still trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but now, something inside of me was telling me to go back to sleep, that this was all just a dream. It was such a strange feeling. Deep inside, I knew I was awake. I even pinched myself to make sure. But it was like my subconscious was fighting itself. Eventually, that calm part of me won. I eventually calmly laid back down and went back to sleep, as if none of it had ever happened. I remember the next day checking my neighbor's backyard for anything that can confirm what I saw wasn't a dream, but there was nothing. To this day, a part of me knows I was awake and what I saw was real. I even remember the feeling of the mattress under my feet and trying to balance. I remember pinching myself hard as a way of confirming I was awake. I remember the chills down my back, but another piece of me fights this, and I question if I really saw anything that night. One thing for certain, I have never had anything come close to that experience in my dreams or in life again. So, do you believe in aliens? Well, after this, I do. I'm also very curious. Has anyone else had any experience that is similar? Or am I just crazy? Is it possible to have a dream this real? I don't usually share this story with people in my life, because it just seems so crazy. I'm not sure if anybody would ever believe me. This encounter actually happened last year, but I found that there's a reoccurring theme. It was August of 2019, and my boyfriend and I were driving down a country back road when I noticed 3 lights in the sky. I watched them as we drove closer to them, but they disappeared. We spent about 20 to 25 minutes and drove back the way we came. I noticed in the rearview mirror that the lights were back, so I told him to pull over, and we both got out to watch them. I should mention here, my dad was an RAF my entire life, and I'm a huge aircraft fanatic. The lights all looked to be separate from each other, as they were zigzagging all over the place. They remained in close proximity of each other, but they faded in and out at different times. We watched them for about 5 minutes before they all faded completely and disappeared. My boyfriend to this day won't talk about them because he can't explain them, but I know they weren't any kind of helicopter or aeroplane. He suggested it was maybe the kids with torches, but there was no light beams from the ground. He suggested maybe we are looking at somebody playing on a hill in the distance. Again, too big, too high, and too fast. So, I downloaded the mod UFO reports dated from 1990 to 2009, and it turns out this area is quite rife with sightings. But, I guess the interesting part is the 3 lights were all reported in the month of August in 1999, 2009, and we saw them again in 2019. Any thoughts? Hey guys, so I had this experience last night. I tried to get it on video, but it wouldn't show up on my phone's camera. I was looking up at the night sky at the stars, and noticed one of the stars was hauling across the sky. The light at first was a pinprick, then it got bigger and brighter than Venus usually is. Then it rapidly faded back to a pinprick, and then it was gone. I then saw 2 more coming into view, one after the other, in the same airspace as the first. These ones flew in a similar direction to the first one, and when I watched them closely, they appeared to bounce, like they weren't just moving in a straight line. They jerked violently and zigzagged across the sky. They moved about the equivalent of 5 to 10 times the size of themselves at a time, if that makes any sense. Anyway, thanks in advance if anybody can shed some light on what it is that I could have been looking at. At first, I assumed a satellite, but they moved so much faster, and there were 3 of them. Tonight, me and my dad were looking at the sky. We were pointing out stars, airplanes, and we landed on what we thought was a satellite. We talked about how it was a satellite, but the color of the light was different than the stars, and it was moving in a line, just like a satellite would. But then we noticed the pattern moved from going in a straight line to moving back and forth rather quickly. It was moving erratically. Me, my mother, and father all saw this. I am in Portland, Oregon, and we did some research, and a year ago, somebody recorded something very similar, and it was even on the news. I feel deeply unsettled after seeing this. And for the reference, this was definitely too high up to be a surveillance type thing during the protests. Has anyone seen something at all like this? Today, my friends and I were stargazing on my rooftop, and we noticed a strange flying object that we almost thought was a plane, because we had heard a loud noise that sounded similar to a plane, or something like a helicopter, maybe. My friend said it's a UFO, and when I asked out loud what it was, it instantly curved and disappeared into space. We all saw it and couldn't believe our eyes. After that, we continued to stargaze and see what else we could see. A large cloud came out of literally nowhere. There was no wind, and it was a very clear night. The cloud moved quickly to where we currently were stargazing. It stayed for a few moments and made strange reptilian-like shapes, then disappeared really quickly. Look, aliens are real, but you already knew that. It was definitely strange but amazing seeing a UFO with my friends. It was a glitch in the Matrix for sure. This happened at around 11:15 p.m. on September 7th, 2020, in Jacksonville, Florida.